want you to take a second and think about your favorite story, or maybe your favorite kind of story. I know in my house, Lena loves a good book. She likes detective kind of mystery things where somebody's witty and solving problems. She likes historical fictions. Philip likes survival things. Alex will read anything. He won't confess to it, but he'll read anything. He reads manuals to things, for enjoyment sometimes. But think about your favorite story. And it doesn't have to be a book. Stories come from a lot of places. There's stories in songs. There's stories within movies, right? And, what makes a story a good story? And to the people who know, because I had to look it up, but there's components and parts to these things. And I thought, there's a lot that could be said about this stuff, like the setting, where the story takes place, or the plot, or the perspective, the point of view that it comes from, or maybe there's a bias or something in there somewhere. There's a theme. There's almost always a conflict, that good guy's going against some kind of rival somewhere. Stories always, though, have characters of some kind of another, right? And I thought, there's a lot that I could do with that. The time's not going to permit us tonight to explore those things. But the aspect of the story that I want to talk to you about tonight is not even in every story. It's not one of those vital components. Some books have them, some books don't. I'm talking about chapters. You thought, what in the world does chapters have to do with anything? And I think about life in general. Life has a series of chapters. My little people there that are still small children at home, their entire life revolves around play or school or family for the most part, right? And their family might even include grandparents and great-grandparents at that point, right, when they're really young. We'll have several that just graduated, and that closes one chapter of life and opens the next chapter of life maybe. Some are just married or on the threshold of marriage. That's definitely a chapter of life, right? May start a family later. There's a lot to be said and books that could be written about raising children and having them in the family. And some are beyond that, and they've even got now what they call an empty nest, and that's a completely different chapter in life, right? Different than all the ones that come before it. There can be the single person out there still too, right? Looking for someone to write their story with. It's the kind of chapter that I'm talking about. And even in our own lives, each chapter has a setting, a perspective, a theme. The characters often change. You may take a promotion and take a job in a different place. Your setting has changed. Your environment has changed. The characters in your story have changed, right? And we have to deal with those things, and different conflicts emerge at different places and different times. But specifically for us tonight, what I wanted to ask you is God in your story? When you think about your favorite story even, is God in that story? And if God is in your story, does he have a main role or does he just have a supporting role? And I think that's an important question to ask. And you think, why? Well, every story, when it reaches that, climax and the good guy faces the bad guy at the end, you sort of get the resolution. Well, there were some survivors from the big war, and they're going to pick things back up, and society or civilization was saved and will prosper and continue maybe. God is the ultimate source of resolution, right, for everyone's story. Why? Because he accomplished that through his son. And you think, how does he do that? So this is the question for you. In your life, does Jesus have no role? Right? Hebrews chapter 5, right, it tells us that though he were a son, right, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And being made perfect, watch this, he became the author of eternal salvation to those who obey him. So he's an author. That's how Jesus relates to your story. He authors your eternal salvation. That is, if you obey him. In 2 Peter, it says that the Lord is not slack, right, concerning his promise, as some would count slackness, right? But he's long-suffering to us. He's patient with us, right? Why? He's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. That's what he would like to write into your story, that you would come to repentance. And I like the way that James says it in James chapter 4, right? Submit yourselves to God. That's step 1, right? Resist the devil. That's step 2. And he'll flee from you. And then you can draw near unto God, and God will draw near unto you. So if God has no role in your life, this is the process of things to do through the obedience to his Son, the obedience to the gospel, submitting to God, resisting the devil, drawing nigh to God. That's the way you get God in your story. More challenging, though, is if God is in your life, he's in your story. Is it just a supporting role? Maybe life is not what it ought to be. Maybe your story is not the way that it ought to be, not the way that God would have it to be. For this, I think about Ephesians chapter 4, and quite nearly the entire second half of Ephesians 4. So if there's a struggle in your life with priorities or something of that nature, spend some time there in that latter half of Ephesians 4. But I'd like to read you just a couple, beginning in verse 20. Paul says there, "But ye have not learned Christ." If he's just got a supporting role, you have not learned Christ. "If so be that ye have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning the former conversation of the old man," that is the old life that you've put off. Remember, you crucified that old flesh. He says, "Then, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which is after God, created in righteousness and in true holiness." So that's the ultimate question, is if God is not in your life and he has no role, there's a way for that to happen and a way for that to begin. And if God is not where he ought to be, if he's just a supporting role and you need to realign him in your life in the rightful place, like we read about in Ephesians chapter 4, I would encourage you to do those things tonight while we stand and while we sing.